All right, today we have another episode from the archives with one of my incredible guests. Enjoy. All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. All right, guys, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. And if this is the first time joining us, my goal here is to bring a greater awareness to trauma and really focus on the trauma workers, and more specifically, people who are just starting out on their journey, getting trauma informed, becoming trauma focused. Today, I'm very excited to introduce my guest, Dr. Mica Gonzalez. Mica, welcome.
Thanks. Good to be here, Guy.
All right, man. So Dr. Mica Gonzalez is a clinical psychologist specializing in early childhood in the San Francisco Bay Area. His work involves helping young children and their families recover from trauma and loss, primarily through the medium of the child-parent relationship. Mica received his doctoral degree from the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology and trained in a variety of settings, including a middle school, an adult day treatment facility, and a home visiting early intervention program. Mica is trained in Child-Parent Psychotherapy, a trauma-informed approach to early intervention, and has an endorsement as an early childhood mental health specialist from the California Center for Infant, Family, and Early Childhood Mental Health. All right, brother. And I say that because Mica and I were in school together at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology. Man, I'm so excited you're here. So welcome. Share with our listeners a little bit about where you're from originally, where you're calling from, and then let's get going.
Sure. Sounds good. Well, I'm calling from Berkeley, California, as you know, and I am from San Antonio, Texas. So still got a little Texan blood coursing through my veins, even though I've been out here for a good while.
Nice, nice. So one of the reasons that I'm excited to have you on, I mean, not just because I know you, but you're really one of the few people that I've come across who's really specializing in early childhood, when working with their younger kids, and specifically working with the child-parent relationship. And in fact, I don't have anyone else who's been on the podcast who is really speaking to that directly. So I'm really excited to have you share with our listeners what's going on in that arena.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot to say.
So let's start out with a quote, something to set the stage. It can be a mantra, a sentence, whatever. What do you have?
So I came across this quote like within the last year or two, and I still keep mulling it over because it's so rich, and there's just it applies, I think, not only to my personal life, but especially to my professional life. And it's from a psychoanalyst named Christopher Bolus. And he writes, "To be a child is to endure a prolonged situation in which the human mind is more complex than the self can ordinarily bear. Our minds in themselves produce contents that will be overwhelming. To be successfully normal, then, we rather have to dumb ourselves down."
Okay, you got to read that one again. For that definitely has got a lot to it. So yeah, do that one again.
Sure. To be a child is to endure a prolonged situation in which the human mind is more complex than the self can ordinarily bear. Our minds in themselves produce contents that will be overwhelming. To be successfully normal, then, we rather have to dumb ourselves down.
Wow. Okay. So unpack that for people who are listening. Why that quote? When did that begin to kind of resonate for you?
I mean, I can tell you it resonated right away, just because, I spend most of my days working with toddlers and preschoolers, and I spend much of that time confused about what it is they're actually trying to communicate to me, because especially because many of the children I work with also, in addition to having some mental health issues, they also have a speech delay. So a lot of the communication is nonverbal. It's through action, it's through movement, it's through sound. And this quote really captures the sort of predicament that I think, essentially all little kids find themselves in. This is a normative experience to have this, hulking, supercharged engine that we call a brain or a mind that is really, in some profound way, it's just too much for us, right, especially in the beginning. And that we have to find these ways, ideally through our caregivers and through our peers and siblings, our early relationships, to dumb these kind of superpowers down a little bit and bring them within, to some extent, within our control.
Nice. You mentioned a speech delay. Is that coincidental? Is that because a lot of the kids have experienced trauma, or
definitely lots. Yeah. Lots of, I would say, 90% of the kids that I work with have experienced trauma, and, developmental delays are a common response. Yeah. And they can be, they can be in the sort of social emotional channel. They can be in the speech and language channel, but I tend to see kids that have multiple delays in multiple areas.
Mm-hmm. Let's kind of move along and talk to us about how you got here. How did you start becoming interested in this and progress into focusing on this particular specialization?
Sure. I think, it started out early in my training. I, of course, just like anybody else, I wanted to be good. I wanted to be able to think of myself as sort of competent and a good therapist. But I learned pretty quickly that was not easy. That was not going to be easy for me to do. And my first practicum training was working with kids, and it was familiar to me because I had been a tutor for, over a decade at that point. And I continued to tutor, mostly middle school and high school kids throughout my graduate training. And so my first placement was at a middle school. And so it was familiar to me, but I really just spent most of that first year figuring out how to not be a tutor with the kids. And so in some ways, it was a challenge because I had to learn a new way of being with kids, but it was familiar because it was kids. When I got to my second placement, I was working in a community mental health setting, and I was working with adults that were much, much more impaired, and the kinds of adults that had tens of hospitalizations and had always, for at least their adult lives, had been in and out of different mental health and sort of criminal justice systems. So working with people who had really suffered a lot. And I learned quickly that I didn't know what their experience was like. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just that I couldn't relate to it because I hadn't had any sort of substantial traumas myself in my own upbringing, but I actually just didn't have a good theory of how their minds got the way they were. And so when I would try and do kind of present moment kind of interventions with them, I would trigger many of them. Mm-hmm. And they would sort of decompensate and get otherwise get dysregulated. And I didn't understand why. I didn't have a good sense of the structure of their mind. And I realized that I need to see this up close from the very beginning. So I found out about early childhood mental health, and I said, that's where I'm going. I need to see how this begins. And for a number of reasons, I couldn't do that right away. And so what I settled on was going to a training institute that focused on psychoanalytic psychology, because there I knew at least I could get the theory of early childhood.
Mm-hmm. Now, was this while you were still in grad school or
yes.
afterwards? Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I had a great experience doing a 2-year training program at Access Institute in San Francisco. And it really, really changed how I approach therapy, just fundamentally. Mm-hmm. And I felt like I had a good, or at least a better sense of how my long-suffering patients got to be that way. Mm. But go ahead.
No, well, I was just going to say, I mean, what it sounds like, I mean, to me, what it feels like is you kind of really listened to yourself to kind of follow, to put one foot in front of the other. You know, someone might have said, oh, I don't, despite the fact that maybe you didn't feel quote unquote at home with adults, you know, someone might have said, well, you know, I kind of still want to do that. But you kind of said to yourself, well, I want to go back and find out how this all starts, you know, just that process of listening to yourself. I really kind of appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, it didn't stop there, because, you know, while I felt better about having some understanding of where my patients had come from psychologically and historically, I still wanted to see it. I still wanted to see that those first relationships that were contributing to the kind of you know, presentations that I'd see, including the pathology. And so it wasn't until my postdoc years that I was able to do that, and I found a community mental health agency where I could actually do this home visiting and work with primarily mothers, but some fathers as well. I could work with them and see how they interacted with their children. And you know, it was a different focus in some ways. You know, I had gone from doing a lot of individual therapy and then, you know, couples therapy with adults. And here I was now doing almost like a kind of couples therapy, but with the child and parent. Mm-hmm. And, you know, is really a cool thing to discover. You know, of course, almost all the theories that we learn in school about early life privilege that first relationship. You know, usually or historically, we've thought about it as the mother and the child. But to see it up close and to realize that, like, yes, man, this really, I mean, of course, there's other factors. There's constitutional factors as well, environmental factors, but it really has such a profound impact on how the child gets going in life.
Nice. That's so, I mean, there's so many questions I want to ask, but I just want to be mindful of the time too. Well, let's talk about an early clinical error and what you learned from that, how that maybe influenced your work.
Sure. You know, when I was thinking about this, I was like, you know, there's just so many to choose from. The hard part is narrowing it down. Mm-hmm. You know, when I was in my pre-doctoral training, there was a child who I worked with who I just was never really able to reach. And it led to, I worked with him for several months, and it led to some kind of bizarre moments in the treatment, which I can say more about. But what I realized, I met with this child's mother first, and just had a real strong emotional reaction to her after the session. And of course, you know, I was committed to working with the family and still very much a beginner. I think I didn't really spend enough time understanding my emotional response to the mother, who, you know, I believe had some, you know, access to kind of things going on, but was a mother who was concerned about her child, legitimately and appropriately concerned about her child nonetheless. And over the course of the next few weeks, as I got to meet the child and continued to meet with the mom periodically, she disclosed something that necessitated a call to Child Protective Services. And from that point, I lost her, and she never returned to the treatment. And I went through the motions of, you know, reaching out to her and trying to bring her back. The dad, who was The dad and the mother were divorced. So the dad stepped in and he began to participate. And so the child was able to continue with me. But, I went through the motions of reaching out to mom and was just never able to reach her again. And what ended up happening was that the child would do every manner of thing to avoid being with me. Mm-hmm. And, I tried so many different things. He's the only person I've ever worked with that could, with some frequency, just fall asleep. He would fall asleep during the sessions and not wake up until the end of the session. Wow. It was a very unusual treatment. And then other times he would go to the bathroom and he would stay there. I would say the most substantial contact he and I ever had was passing notes under the bathroom door.
Wow.
It was actually those moments actually gave me hope. But I ended up having to refer him out to a higher level of care, which I do think was appropriate. But I think I ended up feeling pretty disappointed with how the treatment had gone, and the father was understandably disappointed as well. And I think my big mistake was not really understanding the importance of the mother's role in all of it. And I did wonder, I still wonder if mom was kind of coaching the child before he was to come to the sessions with me after the CPS call, which wouldn't be the first time that's happened in my experience. But I think the root of it was I didn't understand the mother's value in the treatment, because I hadn't really worked through or really had a good understanding of my own emotional response to her.
Which was what? You said it was strong, but can you be more specific?
Sure. Yeah. I felt pretty put off by her. I felt it was hard for me to like her. Mm-hmm. And, there was, I could list particular characteristics, but, I think some of it was just, the good old fashioned unresolved countertransference of my own. Mm-hmm. That at that time, I wasn't aware of its impact.
So Mica, what's the take home here for the people listening who, just period. What would you say you'd like the take home is?
Yeah, I mean, spending time on countertransference, spending time thinking about, of course, in consultation, in supervision, thinking about and processing, what my own experience is and was, and something that I do much more now. Mm-hmm. It's a part of, I work at a mental health agency now, have a terrific supervisor, and that's a part of. It's always a part of our dialogue is my own experience in relation to, my patients, the little ones and the parents as well.
Let's talk a little more about how you work specifically. You're specializing in early childhood. What do you've talked a little bit about, working with parents and the kids, but let's kind of put a magnifying lens on that, and talk to us about what that might look like for those listeners who maybe aren't really sure.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's a good question. Sometimes I forget that the whole field, many even therapists don't even know about early childhood mental health. So, it's sort of like, typically if I'm able to have a child and parent in the room at the same time, a lot of the work is geared towards strengthening that bond. And making it more dynamic, especially if there's trauma involved with it, which there frequently is. It's helping the parent be aware of their child's emotional communications related to the trauma. It's helping the parent become aware of their own emotional communications related to the trauma, and helping both the child and parent perceive the parent as as somebody who's strong enough and secure enough and safe enough to help the child process the trauma. Many times, whether or not the parent was involved, say, for example, if there's a sort of a discrete traumatic moment, which in my experience there often is, that even if the parent's not involved, that can damage the child-parent relationship because it upsets people's, including the child's, assumption of safety in relationships. And so the parent often has to work to help the child feel safe again. And it gets even more complicated if in some way the parent was either perpetrating or complicit in the actual trauma. So what it actually looks like often is that the child and parent come in, and I meet them in playrooms or in the clinic or in my private practice, or I'll go to their home or even sometimes meet them in the community. And the child will be offered to play with toys, and I help the child and parent play together. Invariably, the child will bring up, the child or the parent will bring up, what ails them, whether that be a trauma or not. And I will help them to try and have some form of a dialogue, whether it be an actual dialogue with words or a play dialogue, or even, playing with toys or playing with just, doing other games. So, it's a 50-minute session in the office. It's often longer when I'm in the community or in the home, because as you can understand, there are a lot of distractions and other demands in the home. So there are times where things feel very informal in the home. The frame for therapy is very different. Mm-hmm. But, ideally within an hour and a half, sometimes longer, we at least have moments where we can dedicate time to sort of working on the reason for a referral.
You talked earlier about when you were working with adults, and you were like, well, I want to find out where this started, in a sense, how people got to this point. Yeah. In addition to that, in addition to that curiosity, what do you think it is about yourself that allows you to do this work effectively?
I think, I think this is true for probably most therapists. It would have to be, I've always just really loved people. Mm-hmm. I think we're all pretty fascinating when we're able to share our story. And, I'm also interested in just the wide array of ways that we communicate with each other. And, kids are really interesting because they, as most parents and child therapists know, they do so much communicating with their actions. Mm-hmm. As compared to their words, even when they've got a great command of language, their movements, their behaviors, their tantrums, their attacks, their joy on the playground is all that communicates so much of, their important moments. And I feel drawn to that. I feel drawn to that kind of, detective work, I think. Uh-huh. I mentioned earlier that I spend so much of my week confused or uncertain about what a child or a parent is trying to communicate. But I enjoy that. I feel it's some low level suffering in the moment because I really do want to help the child understand what's going on for them and the parent as well. But, there's something really rewarding about that process that will always, for me, involve a significant amount of uncertainty. I don't know. Yeah. There's something thrilling in that.
There's something thrilling there. Yeah. I mean, I worked with kids for a little bit, and it demands a lot of patience, a lot of kind of a natural process of an unfolding. I mean, not unlike working with adults, but with kids, like you said, there's that nonverbal stuff, and things are going to really happen on their own time frame. And to me, and the way what I know of you, you sound like you're really well suited for it. And I think a lot of people might be listening or out there and going, yeah, that sounds like it might be something I want to try. And other people are like, yeah, but that's just the way it goes, right? I mean, but thank God we have people like you doing this work.
A lot of the people who I've met in doing this work, a lot of people came from, being preschool teachers or having some other involvement with, very young children. I didn't have that. But when you and I were starting out, my main interest, in part because I had worked with kids for so long, my main interest was working with adults. I was interested in working with high functioning, people, the kind of worried well, that were, psychologically minded and sort of able to pay a private practice fee out of pocket. And, that was my sort of naive vision of things. I didn't have like any real other real life experience of working with very young children. It just ended up being something that just really captured me and has allowed me to have kind of a pretty diverse experience, even within that specialization, because I regularly meet with parents for collateral sessions. I do it weekly if possible. And that collateral session is kind of interesting too, because for me, it's sort of half consultation, half therapy. So it's consultation because we're talking about, some of their child's development. We're talking about some of the things they can actually do to, some behavioral things that they can do to improve the child's self-regulation or sense of safety even. And then it's therapeutic in that, these parents, they get into it. And we often will talk about their past as it relates to their child. And I'm sure you've heard of the whole idea of, intergenerational transmission of trauma. Mm-hmm. And that is just such a profound reality for the work that I do. And sometimes I even get, this is as we're talking about this, I'm just thinking more about the privilege of this role that I have. Sometimes I've even been able to meet grandparents. Wow. And meet grandparents, and I get three generations, in a session, and it just is so helpful for understanding, what happened to the parent. To the extent I can, of course, and what has happened with this child.
Nice. Let's talk about what you got going on your website. It's
Sure.
thegoodenougghparents.com. And I love your kind of tagline here, which is be better than perfect, be good enough. I love that. Yeah. So just quickly, so Mica can be reached at thegoodenougghparents.com. It's all one word. So what's going on with you at your website? People are going to go there. What can they expect to find?
Well, right now, what I have in this very moment, I have a blog. And so this website is dedicated to parents of children roughly ages 0 to 6 who are just looking for some, generally speaking, it would fall under the category of parent education, and looking for some ways of sort of similar, in some ways similar to the therapeutic work that I do, but this is more for a non-clinical population. Parents who are really trying to understand their children's behavior, who are struggling with, toddler tantrums, the whining, the interrupting, the aggression, all the sorts of things that you see in the early years that are normative, So one of my big hopes was to demystify early childhood for parents and give them the kind of information that they need to be able to respond in a way that most parents want to respond. The reason that the tagline is "Be better than perfect, be good enough," that's drawn from a psychoanalyst. Well, the whole website is actually, the name of the website is drawn from Donald Winnicott, and he had this idea and wrote a seminal paper about the good enough mother. And his developmental model held that over the course of the first year of life, as a child is developing a sense of self that is separate from the mother, that the mother, over the course of the first few months, has to be really kind of obsessed with the child and, highly, highly responsive to the child's needs, in part because of their just incredible dependence. But that over the course of that year, that kind of obsession or preoccupation that the mother has with the child slowly decreases, such that she becomes somewhat less responsive. And in that decrease of responsiveness, that facilitates the child healthy, normative development of a self. So one way of putting it is that the mother actually has to fail sometimes. She can't be perfectly responsive to the child, or else the child's sense of self might be compromised. So I made the joke to some colleagues the other day that this is a kind of anti-narcissism website. I want parents to understand, especially parents who are nervous and who might fall into the category of being a helicopter parent, that they actually do help their child's development in some situations when they're not perfect.
Well, that feels good.
That's the point.
That feels good to me. All right. Let's share a kind of book recommendation here, and then we'll say goodbye. What do you have for us?
So for the work that I do, two of the biggest, most influential books for me have been Psychotherapy with Infants and Young Children. And that's written by Alicia Lieberman and Patricia Van Horn. Okay. And they're really, they of course had teachers before them. Infant mental health has been around for decades. But that's really the seminal book on what is called Child-Parent Psychotherapy. And go ahead.
I was just going to say, so Psychotherapy with Infants and Young Children, Repairing the Effects of Stress and Trauma on Early Attachment. Okay. Alicia Lieberman, Patricia Van Horn. We'll have that linked up at the show notes page. And were you going to say something else? Offer another book too?
Yes.
Okay.
Just because, and it's by Alicia Lieberman and her team at the Child Trauma Research Project in San Francisco. It's called Losing a Parent to Death in the Early Years. Now, this is like very specific work, right? We're talking about a child who's lost a parent. But I've just found it so instructive and such a guide, because that kind of work, when a parent dies, especially by violent means, it's just a really, really heavy case, and you need as much support as you can. And that book is a great place to start.
Wow. Okay. So both of these books will be up at the show notes page at thetraumatherapistpodcast.com. Mica can be reached. What's the best way for people to reach you? What would you like there?
They can reach me. I actually have two websites. One is thegoodenoughparents.com. And the email associated with that is Mica, M-I-C-A, at thegoodenoughparents.com. I respond to that one. And also my private practice website is Dr. as in Dr. MicaGonzalez.com, MicaGonzalez.com. And my website is dr.mica.gonzalez@gmail. Can I just squeeze in one other thing about the website?
Of course.
I also wanted listeners to know this may be relevant for any parents that they're seeing in their practices. or any listeners who are parents themselves, that I am actually within the next couple of weeks going to be launching a free online course, 35 to 40 minute course on parenting tough toddlers. And they can go to the website and sign right up, subscribe.
Nice. Okay. So do you have that link? Can you shoot me that link, or is that up now?
Yeah, it's right. It's right. It's right.
Oh, I see it.
Page of the home.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Awesome.
Can't miss it.
All right, man. Well, thanks so much, Mica, for sharing your expertise and passion. It was awesome talking to you, man.
Yeah, likewise, Guy. Thanks a lot.